Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Vaishnavi. I'm the principal investigator for the AHEAD study here at the University of Pennsylvania sites. So thank you all for your interest in the AHEAD A345 study. So the goal of this webinar is just to provide some background and a chance for you to ask questions about the study. I know you've already reached out to us about your interests, but we'll just provide a brief overview and allow you to ask further questions. So very briefly, this study is the AHEAD study. It's a placebo-controlled, double-blind, randomized controlled trial, the medicine called lecanemab, which is an anti-amyloid antibody. The goal of this study is to find individuals who are cognitively normal between the ages of 55 and 80, and give them either a placebo or this medicine as part of a clinical trial to determine if this medicine could be helpful to slow down or prevent the development of Alzheimer's disease. So how does this medicine work? We know that in Alzheimer's disease, there are several proteins which build up in the brain. Specifically, there are proteins called amyloid and tau. Amyloid is the protein that deposits in the brain in something called amyloid beta plaques. Until 10 or so years ago, we didn't really know that this amyloid starts building up years before people have symptoms of memory loss. We now know that the amyloid starts building probably 10 to 15 years before people have any memory symptoms at all. So we now know that about 25% of cognitively normal people at the age of 65 already have amyloid in their brain. So the idea of this and other studies is to try to find a way of getting rid of that amyloid and to see if that would help to slow down or prevent the development of the other symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and to really hopefully prevent the development of memory loss. So the medicine that we're using here, which is lecanemab, does bind to the amyloid in the brain, and it has been shown to help get rid of this amyloid protein in the brain. There have been clinical trials with this medicine you may have heard about. So this medicine was actually recently approved by the FDA for use in individuals with mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia. And in the clinical trials, it did show that in individuals with memory loss, there was a slowing of cognitive decline. So the hope is that if we use the same medicine in people who are still cognitively normal, we may be even more effective at preventing the development of memory loss. So who are we looking for in this study? We're looking for healthy individuals who are between 55 and 80 years of age. Everybody must have a reliable study partner, someone who knows you well, who will attend some of the study visits and provide additional collateral information about how you are doing during the course of the study. The study is a 4-year-long study, and again, the goal is for people to stay for the duration of this study. I'll talk a little bit about the screening steps because we're kind of at that stage for all of you. The screening involves multiple steps, and it takes many weeks to go through the screening process. The first step is the stage 1A visit. People come in for some safety tests, a blood sample and a urine collection, as well as a blood collection for biomarkers and genetic testing. So we know that the gold standard to determine if people have amyloid in their brain, which is really the prerequisite to get into the study, would be something called a PET scan. In the past, we would go to the PET scan, but there would be many steps before that. So what has happened recently is that there have been new biomarkers which have been developed. And specifically, we now have some blood-based biomarkers, which is a little easier to do than to go into a scanner and do a PET scan. So what we start with is a blood test. So this blood test will determine if people are likely going to have elevated amyloid or not. It's not a 100% test, meaning that some people, even with an elevated blood marker, may not have enough amyloid on the PET scan later, but it's a screening step to kind of help speed up the process to get people into the study. So in the first stage, we'll do the safety test and the biomarker test. If there's evidence of elevated amyloid on the blood test, we'll move on to the stage 1B visit, which is where we do more memory questionnaires and tests to assess if people are cognitively normal or not. Sorry, my 1.5-year-old is in the background. So after that, the next stage after we do the blood-based test to determine elevated biomarkers and we do the cognitive testing, we then move to the confirmatory step to do the amyloid PET scan, which is stage 2. Subsequently, we'll disclose the amyloid PET results. We'll do an MRI scan and then some additional tests, including a tau scan, which is another imaging test, and an optional lumbar puncture, which is another way of getting the same sort of amyloid and tau data. So if we find that people have an intermediate or elevated level of amyloid, then people would be randomized into the trial. So the trial is actually a combination of two different trials, the A3 and the A45 trial. So the A3 trial is really for people with an intermediate or borderline level of amyloid. And the A45 trial is for people with elevated amyloid. So if the level is elevated, that means that there is significant amyloid in your brain, and then you're eligible to participate in the A45 trial. And the difference between the A45 trial and the A3 trial is really the frequency of visits, meaning people with the intermediate level who are in the A3 trial come in once every 4 weeks, whereas people in the elevated or the A45 trial come in every 2 weeks for the first 2 years. So this is exactly what it says. So in the A3 trial, every 4 weeks for a total of 4 years, so 55 total infusions. In the A45 trial, people get the IV or the placebo every 2 weeks for the first 2 years, then every 4 weeks for the last 2 years, so a total of 79 infusions. So this is sort of the overview. We're looking for people 55 to 80 who may be at increased risk for memory loss, who do not have significant memory loss currently. They do not have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or another dementia, and really are cognitively normal at this point. We'll use screening tests, including those blood tests and PET scans, to determine people who have evidence of elevated amyloid, and then we will disclose that information to individuals and put them into the trial. So this is sort of the brief overview that I wanted to go over, and I want people to ask questions. Put it into the chat, and then we'll be able to answer all of your questions for you.
Yeah, like Dr. Bachawi said, please feel free to message us for all the questions you may have. Something that I want to add, for the study participant, every time they come in, there'll be a $50 compensation, and then the study partner, the dates that they need to be with the study partner, with the participant, they also get $50 compensation. Just want to put that. And all this information is also in the informed consent forms that we sent, which we also can send them later. And I'm going to put in the chat our email that we can reach out to you, which is the one that we've been using for all the communication. So feel free to ask whatever you need.
So the next steps for all the people who remain interested would be to contact Francisco and the team here to move forward to schedule the 1A visit, which would be the next step in screening.
I have a question. So the first question is, you are screening for amyloid as a biomarker, but PET for tau. Put PET for tau. Why is that? Sorry.
So the amyloid biomarker is the screening step to get into the trial, meaning that we are using an anti-amyloid antibody in this trial. So we want to find people who have elevated amyloid. Everybody with elevated amyloid won't yet have elevated tau. So the timeline that we know is that amyloid gets elevated 10 to 15 years before people have significant memory symptoms. Tau is actually a little closer to the memory symptoms, so usually 2 to 4 years before people have memory symptoms, they may have elevated tau. So we're collecting data. The tau PET scan is not used for the process of screening, but we're collecting data to determine whether or not, first of all, the duration, how much tau people have, does that have any correlation to their future symptoms? And then we'll also do further tau scans in the study to see whether or not getting rid of amyloid could actually also influence how much tau they have. So it's part of our research. It's not part of screening.
Second question, can we still find out our amyloid level if we aren't selected for the study?
So what we find when we do the amyloid testing is either an elevated or not elevated. We don't actually get a level, quote unquote, back. So if you're not elevated, we'll let you know that it's not elevated, but we don't actually have a number or a value that we get from the study. So that's not information that we'd be able to give to you since we don't actually have that.
Another question is it is 4 years of weekly appointments and at what location?
So all of the studies are down at the Perelman Center down in Philadelphia, across the street from the main hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. And it's not weekly appointments, every 2 or 4 weeks. So every 2 weeks for the infusions for the A45 and every 4 weeks for the A3 study. And all this information is also in the consent form where we have the details of all the visits.
And to add to that, what Dr. Vaishnavi mentioned, so the participants that are enrolled in A45, they come in every 2 weeks. For the ones that are A3, they come in once a month. There's going to be throughout the infusion plan, there's going to be moments like a couple every certain, I believe it's every 3 months, there's going to be like MRI, safety MRIs and some blood work that is done. So the participant may need to come in a week before, 2 weeks before the actual infusion just to go over those safety lab and MRI safety measurements. So we have another question that says, are all the tests and IVs done at HUP or can some be done at CCH?
Yeah, so all of the in-person infusions will be done at HUP. The caveat is we have been moving towards a system of home infusions as well. So at first, the visits will be downtown at HUP, but it will be an option for individuals to transition to doing many of the infusions at home. So a visiting nurse would come and do the infusion at your house. So it wouldn't be done at Chester County Hospital. We'd actually transition to doing many of those visits at home. So it wouldn't be as much commute time for you guys. But the initial infusions would be downtown at the Perelman Center.
Yeah, and then, for example, those that we're currently, as Dr. Vaishnavi said, we're working on trying to get the home infusions set up. There are still going to be infusions where they're going to be, like I said, there's going to be some blood work that those infusions are like a little bit more detailed, where there's going to be a clinic visit involved there too. There's going to be some cognitive assessments done there too. Those need to be done on site. So that by on site, I mean here at the Perelman Center. But yeah, we're working on that. And like Dr. Vaishnavi said, there has to be like an amount of infusions that you get done with us on site before you move into the home infusions. Another question, are any of these appointments in off business hours, such as evenings and weekends?
Yeah, most of the visits are during business hours, unfortunately. We don't have night or evening times. Again, there's always some flexibility in terms of the timing. Some are early in the morning, some are later in the afternoons, but they're usually sort of business hour timings. The business hours of the hospital are a little more extended.
Any other questions that you may have? So, and then make sure like email us after the this webinar is done. Make sure to email us if you're still interested so we can reach out to you and go over some phone screenings and schedule the 1A. And then again, if there's any question that you may have later, feel free to also email us and we'll make sure to answer them. And yeah, any other questions you may have?
Thank you, everyone, for your interest, and look forward to chatting more about the details of the study. Feel free to email us at the AHEAD study email address that Francisco put in the chat, and that will put us to the next step in terms of our screening process. So look forward to chatting further with you guys.